A radio signal was arriving from deep space, exactly as expected. The carrier was stable. The connection was intact. Across more than 15 billion miles of darkness, Voyager 1 was still answering every call. And yet, on the screens of the engineers listening to it, the spacecraft had become impossible to understand. Lines of telemetry continued to stream in from interstellar space. Numbers appeared where numbers should appear. Data fields filled with values. The spacecraft was clearly transmitting. But the information made no sense. It was as if an elderly patient still recognized every voice in the room, still nodded when spoken to, still responded when asked a question, yet every sentence had become incomprehensible. Voyager was alive. The problem was that nobody could understand what it was saying. For a machine launched in the 1970s and operating farther from Earth than any spacecraft in history, the most obvious explanation seemed almost too obvious to question. Perhaps the message was being damaged during transmission. Distance encourages that kind of thinking. Signals crossing the vast emptiness beyond the planets are weak. Communication systems age, hardware degrades. If unreadable information was arriving from the edge of the solar system, then perhaps the signal itself was falling apart somewhere along the journey. For a time, that explanation fit the evidence. The telemetry was unreadable. The spacecraft was unimaginably far away. Communication failures happen. The possibility felt reasonable. Then another piece of reality refused to cooperate. Voyager continued obeying commands. Engineers transmitted instructions from Earth. Nearly a day later, the spacecraft responded exactly as expected. Systems changed state. Operations continued. Commands arrived. Voyager understood them. And that created a contradiction. A broken communication path should not selectively destroy understanding in only one direction. If the signal itself were failing, the damage should affect both conversation partners. Instead, Earth could speak to Voyager. Voyager could hear. Voyager could respond. Only the meaning was missing. The stable signal arriving from deep space suddenly meant something different. The connection had never disappeared. The corruption had to be happening somewhere inside the spacecraft itself. One explanation died. The path forward became narrower. Attention shifted toward the spacecraft's flight data system, the computer responsible for gathering engineering information and preparing telemetry for transmission. If meaningless information was leaving Voyager while healthy radio signals carried it home, then perhaps the damage was occurring before transmission even began. But identifying a suspect was not the same as understanding the crime. The spacecraft remained isolated in darkness, beyond the known planets. Every diagnostic attempt required patience. A command traveled outward for nearly a day. A response traveled back for nearly another day. Each question consumed almost 2 days. Each answer arrived slowly. And the very system needed to describe its own condition was the system suspected of being damaged. Imagine trying to diagnose a patient whose ability to explain symptoms has failed. The patient can hear you. The patient can respond. But the patient cannot reliably describe what hurts. That was the challenge facing the engineers. They knew where to look. They did not yet know what they were looking at. As investigation continued, evidence accumulated around a more troubling possibility. Memory corruption. Somewhere inside Voyager's aging computer system, information appeared to be breaking apart. The spacecraft continued operating. It continued communicating. Yet portions of the information being generated no longer matched reality. A map of the spacecraft's memory began to matter more than the radio signal itself. Regions that once held reliable instructions and data now appeared suspect. And with every new observation, another comforting possibility disappeared. The communication system was not broken. The transmitter was not broken. The receiver was not broken. The spacecraft itself was not dying. The damage was becoming increasingly specific. Eventually, engineers identified what looked like the source of the problem. A section of memory had become unusable. The discovery felt like progress. After all, diagnosis is usually the beginning of repair. Except this diagnosis revealed a new limitation. The damaged memory was not something they could simply fix. There would be no replacement component, no repair technician, no servicing mission. Voyager was operating alone in interstellar space, farther away than any human machine had ever traveled. The failed memory would remain failed. Another option vanished. The story was no longer about restoration. It became a story about adaptation. The question changed. Not, how do you repair the damage? How do you continue operating despite it? Engineers began searching the surviving memory for usable territory. The image was almost geographical. A landscape containing regions that could no longer be trusted. Software that once occupied damaged areas needed new homes. Functions had to be redistributed. Instructions had to be relocated. The spacecraft's operating logic would have to be reorganized around missing ground. Every successful step reduced the available margin for error. There was only so much healthy memory left. Only so many places remaining where critical functions could survive. The path forward narrowed again. Then came the test. Commands crossed the darkness. The spacecraft responded. The signal returned. As always, the carrier remained clean and stable. But this time, something else returned with it. Meaning, telemetry began making sense again. Values matched expectations. Engineering information became readable. The endless patterns of nonsense that had once filled computer screens started giving way to recognizable descriptions of the spacecraft's condition. For the first time in months, engineers could once again see inside Voyager. Understanding had returned. Not because the damage was repaired, because the mission had learned how to live around it. The final proof arrived when science data resumed. The spacecraft continued its exploration of interstellar space. The workaround worked. Voyager survived. Yet the ending changed the meaning of everything that came before it. At the beginning of the story, the stable signal arriving from deep space appeared to be evidence that communication still existed. By the end, that same signal represented something more fragile. Communication had never been the thing at risk. Understanding was. The radio link survived the entire crisis. What disappeared was the ability to interpret what the spacecraft was trying to say. And what ultimately saved the mission was not repair, but stewardship. An aging machine lost part of itself. Engineers could not restore what was gone. Instead, they preserved what remained. Today, when that signal arrives from the darkness beyond the solar system, it carries a different meaning than it did before. Not proof that Voyager is still talking. Proof that, despite permanent loss, someone found a way to keep the conversation understandable.